Good afternoon and welcome to this edition of Opinion Central, here live in the Chronicle newsroom. Supervisor Breed, and a number of issues came up. One of the ones that you really emphasized, Supervisor, was housing. You said you were determined, if you're elected to mayor, to build more housing and build it faster. What's your plan?
So, as you might know, between 2010 and 2015, for every 8 jobs we created in San Francisco, we built only 1 new unit of housing. And so we wonder why there's such a housing crisis. We need to build more housing, and we need to build it faster. Part of what I plan to do as mayor is get rid of the archaic, bureaucratic, layered process that oftentimes slows down even 100% affordable housing developments. So we have to do that. We also have to make sure that we're looking at underutilized sites and identifying places to build more housing. I did that in my district in particular at the McDonald's site on Haight and Stanton. I reached out to the owners. They not only are selling us the property, they sold it to us for below market rate. So we're going to build 100% affordable housing. And so when I am mayor, I'm going to develop a long-term strategic plan that identifies sites of that nature so that we can start to build more housing and build more housing faster, working with public-private partnerships, doing it on our own on occasion. But most importantly, we got to address the process, which is slowing down housing development. Also, we can look at modular housing. Modular housing, we can not only build modular housing faster, it's also less expensive. And so we are working with the labor unions to identify a place in which we could develop a factory here to produce modular housing units. We got to be bold, we got to be creative, and we got to move quickly because, if we want to do what's necessary to address issues around homelessness and around what we know people who are leaving our city on a regular basis, we got to build more housing. We got to create a housing ladder that includes low income, middle income, moderate income residents in this process as well.
And speaking of people leaving the city, one of the problems too is many people talk about the lack of opportunities, particularly for residents of San Francisco that may not be able to find jobs in this new changing San Francisco with technology and other companies that have been coming in. Can you speak about any programs or any ideas you have around that?
So I grew up in San Francisco. I grew up in the Western Addition, and I was frustrated by the lack of opportunity. I was fortunate to go to college. I came back. I worked in the community to help save and change lives. And one of the biggest challenges was opportunity, job opportunities where people can get employment where they're making enough money so that they could afford to live in San Francisco. And so holding the companies here accountable to work with our public school systems, providing opportunities for them to get a paid internship while they're in high school. Every high school student in this city should have access to an internship that is paid for the purposes of learning in a particular industry at an early age. The Mayor's Youth Employment and Training Program is what changed my life. I had my first job at age 14 working for the Family School, which is a program that taught women over 18 lessons around trying to get their GEDs. It provided on-site childcare. It doesn't exist anymore, but the point is I learned how to answer the phone. I learned about nonprofit organizations and how they help people. It was the training ground to help get me on the right path. And part of what we have to do in San Francisco, if we want our kids in this city to be prepared for the next generation of jobs, especially in the tech industry, then the tech companies have to take some responsibility in providing those opportunities. And I, as mayor, will make sure that we do just that.
At this point in the campaign, London, obviously there's been a number of panels that you've been on with your opponents, debates, including a big one coming up April 9th at City Club, Chronicle sponsored, I must add, little program note. But you certainly have heard a lot. You probably finish each other's lines at this point. For those out there who are trying to figure out what are the policy distinctions between you and the other main contenders, what would you say? What distinguishes you from the other 3 main contenders?
I think that, what the biggest difference is, I grew up in poverty in San Francisco. I've spent my entire life in the community working to change and to save lives before I was a member of the Board of Supervisors. The biggest difference, I think, is I don't play it safe. I'm willing to take risk with policies that are unpopular, like pushing forward a safe injection site, like reforming our mental health system, which sadly, people oppose because it does involve temporarily taking away someone's rights for the purpose of getting them conserved and getting them healthy and getting them in a safe place. I'm willing to take the kinds of risks that don't always play it politically safe, but it's the right thing to do. If we want to see the kinds of results that we know can happen by making different policy decisions that are bold, then I'm the person for the job. It has everything to do with my experience. When you grow up in poverty, when you have those kinds of experiences, when you're going to funerals on a regular basis, when you're living in an environment where there is hopelessness, where there is despair, and you're in a position to help make the change, you will do all you can to do that. And that is what I've done on the Board of Supervisors, and that is what I will do as mayor, is sometimes it's not the popular decisions, it's the right decisions, because it's going to make the best, it's going to be what's best for San Francisco as a whole, and not necessarily what's best for my political career.
If I could just follow up really quickly, there was an example that you used during the meeting, neighborhood preference. For those who are not familiar with the term, maybe you can tell us what that means.
Yes.
And how you're different than the other candidates on that policy.
So this policy has been around, neighborhood preference, which provides when affordable housing gets built in someone's community, a percentage of that affordable housing will go to the people who live in that neighborhood first. And when we look at the neighborhood I grew up in the Western Addition, where African Americans were completely pushed out of that community, if we had implemented a policy like this years ago, I'm not saying it would have stopped it, but it could have helped in what we're dealing with. And so the policy that I helped lead to pass provides 40% of all new affordable housing. It will go to the residents in that district first. And as a result, when we build 98 units of senior housing in the Western Addition, I'm so grateful that most of those units went to a lot of folks who were from the neighborhood. And in some cases, some of those people were actually homeless in our neighborhood and were born and raised there. And so part of pushing the envelope means, despite people who oppose it, there were a lot of folks who opposed it. No one would step up to the plate. Past policymakers, they wouldn't step up to the plate to push forward a policy like this. And this policy has been around in New York since the late 1970s. Why has no one had the guts to step up and to do a policy like this, especially when you look at all the development in the South of Market, all the development in the Bayview Hunters Point, and most of the homeless population, for example, exists in the South of Market area, in the Tenderlawn and other areas. Why would we not push for the kinds of policies that would provide those residents with priority access to affordable housing that we build in their neighborhoods? So that, I will say, is a major difference between me and others, is that I'm willing to take bold risk in order to accomplish a goal that's going to make a difference, so that the policies, the money we spend, all of that actually makes sense for the people that we claim we're here to fight for. And as someone who understands and has lived through policies that did not work, nothing is more important to me.
What does it look like to compel a lot of, maybe these naysayers or people, particularly in maybe some neighborhoods that maybe don't want the safe injection sites, or some of these ideas around building affordable housing? How do you deal with these differing voices?
It's not easy. I had a challenging situation in my district where there was a youth shelter, and someone and the youth shelter made a commitment when it first opened that it would not be 24 hours. And then when they realized they would lose federal funding, they had to change it and become a 24-hour shelter. The neighbors were outraged, and there was a lot of opposition. And there were some really tense meetings. But I was at those meetings. I worked with the shelter. We came up with some solutions that over time helped to make the neighborhood even better. I mean, it did take like almost 2 years. But the fact is, you have to be willing to get in there and work with the community to help make sure that their voices are heard, their voices are understood. But ultimately, the right decision was to allow that shelter to go to 24 hours, even though they made a commitment, because the loss of that funding was so great that the shelter wouldn't be able to to remain open. And I think as mayor, my goal is to make sure that I'm communicating with residents, I'm helping them to understand the data, how it will make a difference. I've had to deal with these challenges in the Haight-Ashbury community where I've had to defend programs. I mean, I want to be there and support my communities and the people who are part of the communities, but I also care about the services that are here to help change people's lives and even save people's lives.
I'm interested to ask, certainly the progressives who bumped you out as acting mayor or did not extend your tenure because they didn't want to give you an advantage in the June election. One of the things I'm hearing around town is it seems like there's a certain backlash against that. Do you think ultimately, especially from women who felt like you were not treated fairly in that process? Let me ask you, London, do you think in the end that actually is helping you in your campaign and boosting support?
You know, I think there's a lot of people out there who unfortunately knows what it feels like to be treated the way that my colleagues treated me, and they were really upset about that. And, you know, I knew people were watching. I was really disappointed in how it was handled. And ultimately, you know, I know that I'm what's best for San Francisco. I know that I can do this job. I know that I can make the change happen that San Franciscans want to see on our streets every single day. I can't control what others decide to do, but I can control my actions because I think about the kids who are watching. I think about, you know, setting a better example and being what I know I can be as a leader for San Franciscans all over this city. And so, you know, it was a challenging time. We got over it. We moved on. Now it's time to make sure that I get elected mayor on June 5th. Now it's time to make sure that we all work together to solve some of these most challenging issues. And so I'm really focused on that. And here we are.
But politically, do you think it actually helped you in the long run?
It's yet to be determined. I mean, you know, it didn't feel good, I'll tell you that. But ultimately, you know, I'm excited about this campaign, and I think that after the election, we'll see what happens.
Great. My last question is just around some of the ideas and policies that you have, particularly, let's say, maybe around transportation. Some of the issues that we hear constantly for people that are commuting into the city, particularly around BART and then even on Muni, is the trains aren't running on time, they're constantly late, they're crowded. It's just a constant problem. Are there any policies or anything in particular that you see kind of push that forward or to alleviate some of the stress for a lot of people that are coming into the city to work?
Yeah, and part of what we have to do is look at what's happening in our city with technology. I mean, we have rideshare companies, we have delivery companies, we have all these different approaches to transporting people around the city. Now, we know that back in the day, taxi cabs had medallions, and there was a limited number of taxi cabs that can function in our city at any given time. And I think that it's important that we look at the data for all these different companies that exist that are driving around the city every single day and come up with a system that puts some limitations on that to address issues around congestion. We have to look at also deliveries and when the deliveries are occurring and making some changes to our delivery system. And so I think that there are ways that we could address this issue, but the problem has been is, you know, we're looking at regional solutions, and that includes, you know, making sure the Transbay Terminal is built, making sure we have buses and trains and other things. But what is our long-term strategy to move in a better direction to address congestion as we build more housing, as we make changes to infrastructure? What are we going to do? And as mayor, I will make sure that there is a plan of action to make it clear so that we can see the difference in what's happening on our streets every single day. We have to put some limitations on these particular companies and the number of vehicles that are in San Francisco on a regular basis. We need our state policymakers to assist us in that as well, because it shouldn't take 30 minutes to go one block on Folsom Street to get anywhere. That's just insane. And so we are going to have to put forth some regulations, and we're going to have to make public transportation better with more buses, with more trains, with more drivers. That's one of the first things I did as a member of the Board of Supervisors. I sponsored the legislation to replace the entire bus and train fleet for Muni. And you know how long buses and trains take to get built and get tested and get on our streets, years. And we're just now seeing some of the first new trains on the streets. Our previous trains, every 4,000 miles they were serviced. The current, it's like 46,000 miles. What a difference. And we also had to make sure new drivers were hired. So we need it can't just be plug in the holes and fix it as it go. We need a long-term strategy to address this issue.
London Breed, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Also want to thank my colleague Spencer Whitney and our executive producer Brittany Schell. And with that, I want to close this edition of Opinion Central. Thanks so much for watching.